So this is not how I thought I'd dive into this subject originally, but I'm going to loosely connect this now, all of these things now, and then more firmly later to my issue with spiritual vibration talk and how people's vibration has become related to their worthiness, their effectiveness at living in other people's judgment, experiences of poverty, and how that is not as valuable as the abundance mindset. Cynicism aside, later I will talk about hubris, humility, and the notion that our vibration is the arbiter of nothing. And despite the disconnected dots of my annoyance with expectations around vibration and what I'm getting ready to talk about, it seems appropriate to connect with previous thoughts about science. In this case, I'm just going to merely mention that there is no such thing as my vibration or your vibration. You are not a singularity. At the minimum, each of us humans, at least us adult ones, have over 30 trillion cells that make up our perceived individuation. In addition to those cells, we have 30 to 40 trillion bacteria on us and within us, along with all other multiple or multi and single-celled organisms that live with us, each with their own vibration, each with their own specialized consciousness, and specific awarenesses that create an individual human being. Our intention of a vibration, perhaps loosely defined as a mood, is interconnected with those trillions of cells and their vibrations. But our mind is not the lead. I'll talk about that more later. We'll get into the science of things, but first we're going to talk about opinions about science. Somewhere, a few months ago on Instagram, I read that Amir Zuabi, the Palestinian playwright, said at a climate-focused conference, "I want to be controversial. Science isn't everything." Said no one, including scientists. Even scientists are aware that there are other lenses to perceive the world through. There are other experiences that are not quantifiable and may never be. It doesn't mean they don't exist, but they're not provable. Science is not a monolith of anything. It is a means of measuring some things and relating those measurements into a larger world for a myriad of reasons, mostly for our well-being. Zuabi's context is different than mine, but I feel like addressing it now because there is a whole commercial community of pseudoscientific, sort of medicine way-y communication that says science is, if not exactly bad, that it's wrong. And it's reflected in our current administration via Robert Kennedy and his ilk, as well as wellness and cosmetic and other beauty and hygiene and even science-grounded people within companies that are determined to sell you something that may or may not work wondrously for some people, while also not working at all for others. And then there are even other groups who will put something in a bottle that's as valuable as what you flush down the toilet, and they will smile while marketing it to you as liquid gold. And because there's a huge market in convincing you that you're broken, that you need healing and they can do the healing. We buy into the idea, and then we buy the shit, the goods, of course, in one convenient subscription package where they hope that we'll forget we subscribed. But here's the deal. Science its job is not to tell you what you want to hear. It is precise, and it is slow moving, purposefully. It'll shut some shit down and it will inspire some other shit, like medicines and knowledge of molecular mechanics, both within human bodies and others, and star speeds and new paint colors and textiles and textile and plastics recycling bacteria, and the newest, most commonsensical thing, and perhaps comical, that just hasn't been thought of yet. And if the healer world, including those within the Western medicine spheres here, will actually participate beyond the blinders of any kind of limiting faith, we'll all have our minds astounded and hearts engaged in some kind of passion and hope around growth and change. I also want to add that sometimes science will prove exactly what's been known for eons, but it's not been proven by until it is. Ta-da. Here's where it gets personal for me. So, I've known since the first time I laid hands on somebody or worked with them remotely, doing the healing work. There's an aside about electrifying myself out of the tub that we'll talk about later. Like I literally electrified myself out of a lovely bath. But that's for another time. But I knew that the success of my work came from two different elements and affected two different elements. The first came from my very own body. It wasn't somewhere else. It was from this thing. And the second came through God, though I didn't call God then. I knew that the electricity I generated was the catalyst for permanent, unequivocal physiological healing. I knew it. I couldn't explain it, but I knew it. I also knew that the direct experience of that thing I did not call God at the time healed all emotional wounds nearly instantaneously and for almost all people permanently. Now, these days, I don't have to explain it because science, through replicated studies and more anecdotes, says publicly, in English even these days, that transcranial magnetic stimulation heals mental illness. Electrical stimulation of the vagus nerve provides permanent healing for inflammation-related illness and disease, both physical and psychological. We now have proved that transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation and neuromuscular electrical stimulation do the same things. Depression, boop, gone. PTSD, gone. And so much more. But the thing is, Oriental medicine knew all of this thousands of years ago. Chinese researchers of the more modern world have published studies left, right, and center about acupuncture therapies with and without electricity and their effectiveness in eradicating or managing chronic illness and pain. Like the most annoying part of that one healing class I went to where I was questioning my own life choices, we had to watch a Greg Braden narrated video where Chinese energy healers were shown in a surgical theater, real time, dissolving a tumor with their hands. So these radical new therapies are only radical to any sales team. They have been in progress for decades of trial and error, and more error and error and error, until they are discarded entirely or later built upon by other generations. Sometimes, with a little bit of luck, they'll fire straight into bodies and minds with ease, with precision, and with astonishing efficacy. Some are based on plants that have been doing the same thing for eons. Some are the plants that have been doing the same thing for eons. Some are just electricity. And some things are just repackaged and sold as the miracles they actually are, or they're labeled as the same, but there's nothing to them, because greed is a clear sign that people are peoply. So this isn't much of a segue, but I'm going to give an example and attempt to connect these two dots with a third. My work with missing and murdered Indigenous women. So there's a nation whose teachings of the old way instructed people not to look at the red northern lights. So a few months ago, while here in the South, things were lovely, and we were all in awe throughout the evening by the interactions with solar energies in our own atmosphere. Others were relying on old stories about the dangers inherent in looking at the exact same thing. We're essentially looking, or in this case, not looking at the same thing through very different lenses. And before you start judging people, listen. One of the interesting things, very interesting things about this kind of contrast is the inherent fear, judgment, jealousy, and anger that it inspires through people rather than curiosity, which is why I'm saying fucking listen, just for a little bit. So I learned of this story through a Facebook thread of someone whose art and heart I really admire. And in this thread, there were two camps. One, yes, the old ways are the only way. And the second camp was those are the old ways and they should be ignored. Because we are in a new time and they're not relevant. My line of thinking bridges those two camps. One of the things that this brought up for me was a memory from maybe the early 2000s or the 90s when hantavirus became prevalent again in the American Southwest desert. And scientists and folks of the Western medicine frame of thought were in a stir. They were almost in a panic because it had not been seen at scale in a very, very long time in humans, and it was difficult to get treatment for many people. They were afraid of mass death. Then there were people of the medicine way in cultures across the desert that said very simply, the rain did it. Simple. And folks relying on the Western medicine approach as the modern way, the right way, the correct method of understanding, said it couldn't possibly be rain because rain does not do that. Rain does not cause disease. So, fast forward a couple of years, and ta-da, scientific research showed that increased moisture in areas of prolonged aridity, like, say, the Southwest desert, created the conditions for the virus's re-emergence or renewed relevance within human population. It was, in fact, proven by science that those people of the medicine way were absolutely right. Not entirely wrong. They just said it more simply. One of the things we really forget in our hubris, in our hanging on to how things used to be as the way or how they should be now, is that we forget, or shouldn't be now, I guess, we forget that there are reasons that led to medicine people and storyteller to offer warnings like these that we don't have access to. So in this case, we do not know that ancestors and ones older than that did not have a record of, say, prolonged drought or a disease raising its ugly head in a pattern that suggested a red aurora borealis was a harbinger for danger. We also don't know if there is the same kind of patterning happening around us now because we don't connect those dots anymore. We call them irrelevant. What we do know is that looking at the red northern lights these days is not going to make us blind. Like, say, another story that is absolutely still true, that staring at a solar eclipse causes danger. The danger is blindness. So can you imagine the number of people, say, 40, 50,000 years ago or more, in a community who almost all walked outside, stared at the solar eclipse, and were blinded? Can you imagine how a community had to respond to that? What if stories around this kind of warning came from the majority of a village becoming blind again or incredibly violent because they stared at the aurora borealis for too long? We do know that we're affected by electromagnetic activity, right? So to me, this is nothing more than the same, along the same lines as old sailor saying, red sky in morning, sailor take warning. There's no difference. So in this same discussion thread, there was a screenshot that was shared from someone who I don't know, but it essentially said, you know, there are reasons for all of these things. And she went on to talk about another example about how we being this particular Indigenous community, we don't talk about the dead. And it's one of the reasons, as old as that story is, that this nation, as well as many, 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 many others across the continent, refuses to engage in the recovering of remains of women and girls who have been disappeared, murdered, and dropped into the ground after their vaginas are of no use. Across all cultures, despite the reverence, or at least the publicized reverence or idea of reverence for ancestors, there is a lot of fear around spirits that has created and perpetuated the fear of work around ancestors. I know for at least 3 decades, many of the ancestors in my world who ended up coming to me went to their direct breathing kin asking for intervention in the money laundering and sex trafficking that was happening in Indian country and particularly within the casinos. Those ancestors were ignored for several reasons. Well, probably only 2, though, maybe 3. Now, there's more depth than this that requires an hours-long discussion. And I will say, I could be off base, but first, most people are afraid of ancestors, whether they identify as Indigenous or not. And there are a bazillion reasons around that. Second, when what ancestors are asking for or demanding removes economic and other protections, there is little reason for anyone within a body to comply with their requests or demands. And maybe, a third reason is the notion that if people who are not of the established medicine way see, hear, converse with ancestors, and others of the invisible persuasion, there's something wrong with them. They're not Indian enough for it to be real or true. They're not sober enough. They're not man enough. They are not brown enough. They're not sane enough, and more. But the cocktail of all of these things makes for a concerted, communities-wide refusal to do the things that are asked by ancestors and also by yours truly when I ask people to help me recover remains. I, too, tried to refuse these ancestors. My initial response almost 9 years ago to that Navajo cops, "What do you feel from this missing persons flyer?" was, "Oh, this is not my circus, not my monkeys." Never mind that I knew it was coming. I just didn't know it was coming in that form. But I tried to ignore it until at least 10 other people, some of them whom I did not know, shared with me their dreams and visions and their own conversations with ancestors and guides. Like, I didn't need to hear "go now" with exclamation point and bolded too many times before I gave up the fight and just fucking went. And I stay with it now, no matter the challenges, because my heart knows things that I can't otherwise know. And there was an experience with a young woman who got me into the desert through a string of lies where she was actually found dead and had been dead weeks before she began a conversation with that Navajo cop and me. I kept going because when she stopped lying, she said, "If I hadn't, you wouldn't have come. We knew how to get you here. They played me like a fucking fiddle." And I kept going. And I keep going because the heart knows what it knows. This is embedded in old stories across the continent that are beyond the fear-based ones. And I gave up the fight with all of it. Like the rest of us, including myself, science only knows what it knows when it knows it. Many of those old stories are instructive for our modern era, but we don't know why yet. And some of those old stories no longer serve the people with a capital T and a capital P. They prevent justice while giving tacit permission for the people to be disappeared entirely. As an aside, before I finish up, I came to know of Amir-Zuabi through the herds, these life-size puppet animals that were guided by humans through a 20,000 kilometer route from the Congo Basin up to the Arctic Circle, symbolizing their flight from climate disaster. Check them out on Instagram and your other favorite social media whatnot. More later. Have a great day. Hang in there, y'all.